right, hello and welcome to our slots office hour. So obviously the special topic is slots, but if you have questions about 3.0 in general, we might know, or we might know where in the docs to point you to. So feel free to ask whatever questions you have. And I am joined today with Anca and Alexander, joined by I think joined by. I think joined with means something else. Sorry, it's a little earlier than I usually stream. So I would love for y'all to introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about what you do at Rasa generally, and then what you did for 3.0 in particular. And Anca, do you want to start us off? Not cut us off. Sorry, I'm having trouble speaking today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anca. I'm a junior backend engineer at Rasa, focused on the open source framework. And for 3.0, I mainly worked on the improvements for slot mappings.
Alexander?
I guess it's my turn, right? So
Yep.
I'm Alex. Yeah, I'm a software developer, software engineer at Rasa. And for 3.0, I also worked a little bit, but honestly, like Anca is a professional when it comes to slot mappings. But I also worked on this feature and a couple more architecture-related things.
Great, thank you. So let's actually start off with a question for Anca. Could you summarize what the big changes are to slots from 3.0? So I've been working in 2.0 or maybe 1.0. I'm sort of familiar with how things work. 3.0, things are different. What's different? What does that mean for me as a developer?
So the first thing to notice when looking in the domain file is that the location of slot mappings has changed from forms. Used to define slot mappings for all the required slots in a form in 2.0. And that has changed in the slots section of the domain file. And then the form's required slots collapsed to a list of slot names. So that's the breaking change in the domain compared to 2.0.
And I've just pulled up an example here from the docs. So if you go to Rasa docs and domain, they should all now be 3.0. So the slots are, instead of just being a list of names of slots here, we have the full description of them and how they get filled. And then, there's no form in this example. Well, if there were forms, it would just look like a list of the slots you need, right? Because you already have the information about how they're filled. Sort of generally. Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about why we made this change? Because, if I'm not using a form, this seems like more typing for me. What's going on? Why did we do this?
Sure. So there were a couple of issues in 2.0, such as I think the most problematic one was not being able to update slot values during a conversation. And then when you had multiple forms requesting similar slots, you had to duplicate the slot mappings. So this this new change avoids this, and also avoiding unexpected behavior, such as by removing the autofill property. So there's no more slot autofill from entity with of the same name. We won't run into issues such as a from entity slot gets filled by an entity, and then the form cannot request it any longer because it's been filled, and it was a bit confusing because autofill was enabled by default. This used to be confusing.
Yeah, I remember trying to help out Mina on a couple of like really gnarly forum threads where the solution was you kind of can't do the thing you want to do, and now you can. So that's the big change with slots. But Alexander, you worked on OR slots as well, right?
Yes. So we also made it possible to use OR with well, but it's I would say it's a little bit of a different feature. So it's not really related to the global slot mappings.
Mhm.
In the case of global slot mappings, one more important feature, in my opinion, is that now we made it possible to set slots outside forms too, and use slots that don't have mappings with conditions. But I can tell you more about our slot mappings as well if you're interested.
Yeah, let's say the OR slot mappings. Oh, actually, we have a question from Amina. What are mappings? What are the possible values to fill it? There's custom and ... So if we look in the docs, you can see here under mappings, we have type custom. What other types of mappings are there? And I think this sort of speaks a little bit to what you were talking about. Alex, if you want to talk on that.
About different types of slots, right?
Yeah.
Or...
Yeah.
All right, of course. Like we have several predefined slot types, like text slot or Boolean slot, or we have categorical slot, which is basically when you specify, like enumeration, for example, you specify the possible values that the slot can take. There is also like a float slot, the list slot, but you can also define your own slot. And yeah, as Rachel mentioned, you can also now use OR with categorical slot mapping. So when specifying your stories, you might use OR to make sure, well, to kind of indicate that the value you're checking might be either this or that.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it answers the question.
I think so. There's a little bit of a delay, so we're going to wait for Amina to respond and let us know if that does. But if you want to learn more about sort of the slot types, which are the ones that we were just talking about, or slot mappings. So the old slot mapping that happened silently was if you had an entity of a name and a slot of the name, they just sort of like silently, secretly got conflated. But you could also fill entities. You could also fill slots in other ways. Apologies, I'm having a little bit of a hard time getting going this morning. And all of the examples, all of the slots in the example domain use custom slot mappings, which is sort of broadly defined. So you could do it with an action, you could do it with different ways. Yeah, I don't know that I'm explaining this very well. Do one of you want to jump in and help me out?
So about custom slot mappings, as you said, you can use a custom action, a regular custom action to set a slot, or you could use the slot validation actions that are in the SDK. We've documented how to both subclass these base classes from the SDK, and also if you're using a different language than Python, how to implement a similar base classes in your preferred action, in your other language action server. So these the slot validation actions are called either validation action, and that can be used to extract and validate slots outside forms. So you should only be extending it once and then listing all the custom extraction code in that subclass. Mm-hmm. And you can continue using form validation action as in 2.0. There are some changes to that, but it's all documented. It's a very, very minor change to form validation action. Slots mapped in the domain parameter has been changed to domain slots parameter name.
Thank you. So I'm gonna keep waiting on Amina and see if she says anything else relevant. We have a lot of other questions. So, also from Amina, what are the default values of the parameters in slots? So I think this is actually a pretty big change where now you have to specify pretty much everything. And a lot of the, sorry, where's the example domain file? I'm just trying to look for an example. Here we go. So this is what, the slot expression definition, I guess definition would be a better word, can look like. We used to have a lot of default behaviors that again was silently happening. Now there is none. You're gonna have to specify everything. So the type of the slot and then where the information to fill the slot is coming from. So none anymore. Used to be.
I think inference conversation, if not specified, will be set by default to true.
One default parameter. Thank you, Anca.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. And Juzer says autofill is off by default, if I understand it right. Yes, there is no more. So I mean, they'll be automatically filled, but the entity mapping no longer happens secretly. You can still have it happen. You just have to say explicitly that that is what's happening. Question from Christian that I'll have either of you jump on. If a slot is filled from an entity extraction, is there any way to get confidence on the extraction and behave accordingly? So sort of like a slot filling fallback policy. I'm imagining in low likelihood extraction having a follow-up confirmation. Yeah. I'll let either of you jump in.
So I can respond to half of the question. So the default action extract slots will run through the mappings of every slot, and if it finds anything applicable, so as in kind of the example on the screen, if in the previous user message the entity name was extracted, it will automatically fill the slot with that mapping. So in that sense, the default action doesn't work with confidences. But probably the first half of the question, like how do we know how the intent was classified and entities were extracted? That is a bit outside of my area.
Alexander, do you happen to know off the top of your head? Oh, you're muted.
Honestly, maybe I'm also not the best person to ask.
I vaguely remember there being something about the fallback policy being able to, or custom fallback policies being able to interact with entity extraction competence, but that might have been a 2.0 only feature. I know that there was some pretty big changes to the fallback policy. So yeah, I'd ask on the forum. Good question. Oh, I don't have my little forum pop up. It's forum.rasa.com. I'm pretty sure. All right. Amina wants to know, can we use OR with rules? So the OR slots. Do you want to talk about that, Alexander?
Yeah, I can answer this. So actually, OR was written only for stories. So yeah.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, the answer is no in this case.
Nice, easy question.
Yeah. We also have a similar one, by the way, like could we use slot was set in rules? It's kind of related, I would say. And in this case, it's also no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in rules, I believe currently you can only check, you can't check the value of a slot, but you can check whether or not it's been filled. All right. Question from Deshant. Hey, Deshant. When a slot is filled with an entity, sorry. Gotcha. Okay, so a slot's being filled with an entity, and then automatically it's getting refilled again with another entity, which has approximately the same regex. What can we do to avoid this? So this would be something like you have an entity for extracting zip codes maybe, and you have like a sender zip code and a receiver zip code, and when you get the second zip code, the receiver zip code supplants the sender zip code is sort of I think a concrete example of the specific questions going on here. What would you do? Anca?
The first thing that comes to mind are entity roles and groups. Sounds like something that you could look into.
I'll pull up that doc page. I just searched entity roles and groups in the docs. So this would be a way to have the same type of entity. So for example, here, city, tagged with an additional role. So this would be like sender and receiver zip code thing. Yeah.
And in the mapping, you can specify these as well if you're using a from entity mapping. So you can specify role, group. Yeah.
Yes, that's something that being explicit helps with. Good question. I hope that answers it for you, Deshaun. Huzer? I'm sorry if I'm saying anybody's name wrong. It is not intentional. I just don't know how they're supposed to be said. If we are using spaCy for entity extraction, can we retrieve the confidence value? Maybe. I'm pretty sure it's stored somewhere. Could I sit down and get it out right now without looking anything up? No.
I think like if you're trying to set the slot using custom action, slot validation action, I don't think those confidences are available through the tracker. So I'm like, even if you get the confidences, like even if the confidences are available, how would you use them to set slots in a custom way? That's I don't think that's possible.
And I will say, just as a little caveat, confidence values only apply when you have basically a machine learning policy somewhere that's doing some guessing. If you're doing something like a regular expression, there's no confidence there. It's yes or no, right? It's a rule-based system. So I would warn you away from trying to build a lot around confidence values of entity extraction, just because not all of your approaches are going to have that, or it's going to be 1 or 0, right? Which will skew your results anyway. Anyway, that was a little aside. Yeah. Question from Christian. Follow-up confirmation by the agent might be, do you mean you wanted cheese? Assuming the user said, give me shiz, C-H-Z, and the entity extraction can't be 100% sure that cheese was the right entity. Okay, so this was about the question of entities with low, low confidence. So this would be an example of something that presumably the assistant hasn't seen a lot of before.
Yeah, I guess if there's no entity extracted, the slot will definitely not be set.
Yeah.
So maybe in some cases you'd want to use from text, but from text to slot mapping, but very cautiously, because that will literally fill the slot with the whole text of the user message.
Yeah. So I guess 2 ways around this from more of an engineering standpoint. It sounds like you're thinking about it more from a experimentation science standpoint. How likely is it that you are getting this type of informal spelling variant? And if it is very likely, then presumably it should be represented in your training data, right? So if people are habitually shortening things in a consistent way, then you should just include that in your training data. And you can also use synonyms to map multiple variant spellings to a single word. Is one thing. Like, is this something that you're really seeing in production? The other thing is, if there's a limited number of options, I might use buttons, right? Like if you have 4 flavors of pizza, I would give people pizza buttons that they can hit so that they're not trying to like blindly guess what pizza options there are. That's just like a frustrating user experience, right? Could I have olives? We don't have olives. Could I have pepperoni? We don't have pepperoni. Could I have onions? We don't have onions, right? Yeah. So I get what you're saying, but I feel like there's ways to like design your way out of having to deal with that situation. All right. Amina wants to know, why do we use a custom action to fill a slot? The slot can be filled by an entity or by an intent, correct? Yes, you can do both of those. Can it be done without a custom action? Can you give me an example of the use of a custom slot? So yeah, Anca, actually, I'd like one from each of you. I think that'll be helpful. Hit me with your best example of something you want a custom action for.
To get things from the database, I think it's like one of the things that pops up in my mind immediately when I think of this. But maybe Anca has something more to add, or?
Yeah, you could, like there could be interesting applications such as inquiring about the state of the tracker. So if, I think there's an example we used in documentation where we keep track of the user attitude towards the bot by counting the number of insults. So you're just counting the number of intents that are classified as an insult. And then keep updating the slot that keeps track of this user attitude with the number of counts of insults, for example. But sometimes you want to customize how you extract a Boolean slot, for example. That's not something that might be very easy to use, let's say a from intent slot mapping, when the user says yes or no, and then a slot will get filled with true or false, or yeah, there might be more complicated situations that I'm probably not good at coming up with.
An example where I have used similar sort of custom actions in the past would be if you have people do free text entry, but then you have to use that to pick one of a number of things. So like I did a dialect quiz and I had people like type how they would say something, and then I picked whatever the closest option was using fuzzy matching. And so for that I used custom action as well to do the fuzzy matching. So if you don't need a custom action, don't add one for the heck of it. Like if you can get by with intents and entities, do that. But it really opens up the functionality.
Yeah, it's like I would say it's for any complex logic, when you need to use some external sources of extra data, or if you just want to write something more complicated than just extracting from entity or intent.
Definitely. Yeah, you can also set slots that the user doesn't set, right? So for things like, platinum customer, silver customer, you could set that silently using a custom action. Not that you should treat people worse based on how much money they spend with you, but that's an example. All right. Question for Anca: how to use low confidence extraction. So follow-up conversation path to confirm that the extraction was correct. A better experience than asking them to rephrase every time.
I guess you could use a slot, like an internal slot. Something was either extracted correctly, let's say slot Y extracted correctly, and you could custom extract this slot, or like custom set this slot. I think I'm confusing myself right now. I think Vincent has created a repository using a very interesting use case with names spelled correctly. So a user gives their name. The name gets checked in a database, and then if then the bot asks, did you phrase this? Did you spell this correctly? And then if the user meant to spell it in a certain way because it was found not to match the database, then you set that internal slot to true, so the information was extracted correctly. Otherwise, you reset that both the slots name and name spelled correctly to none, and then ask for that slot value again.
As a caveat, I don't know that example has been updated to 3.0, so double check the versions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that could be a helpful strategy there. All right. Question from Deshant. I used to do that. So Deshant asked previously about the thing with the entity roles. So did use that for, e.g., slot team names, Indian and game match, slot India versus New Zealand. So what it does is it extracts New Zealand since it's present in the lookup table. So using regex, I created a sport team lookup. So in short, it replaces the previous value India with New Zealand. FYI, I'm using regex entity extractor for lookups.
Yeah, I would say it would be probably more beneficial for you to carry the debugging discussion on the forum, because it's a bit difficult for me to visualize all the information and give you a good answer.
Alex, did you have
it's always tricky to say how it's used in this specific case. So yeah, better to just post the code on the forum and tag us, for example.
I can give you maybe a bad approach. So what I might do in this situation is, if you are really interested in games, right, like specific games, like India versus New Zealand, I might do a lookup table of the games and use that to create the pair, and then you could use a custom slot where like team A and team B are mapped to the specific name of the game. I don't know that that's a good solution. It's pretty hacky, but it's a solution that might work. So something to think on. Yeah. Question from Yasmin. Can two forms share some slots? And if the first form fills a shared slot, will it be changed for the second form as well? Yeah, Anca, do you want to talk about this?
So yes, you can reuse the same slots in forms. If that slot only has slot mappings with mapping conditions, it will not be updated throughout the conversation. So if this slot has been filled by form A, and it doesn't have a slot mapping to be kind of set outside the context of a form, it will not be updated outside of form A, and then form B cannot request. So the functionality from 2.0, where forms are only able to set slots, has been maintained. So forms cannot update slots.
Hope that helps, Yasmin. All right. Christian says, Anca, perfect example from talking about the database, I guess. I'm not entirely sure where in the conversation that refers to, but good job. Anyway. And then for me, I hear you buttons for toppings, but for travel destinations, doom. Synonyms get you part of the way, but there will always be shorthand, not handled, that confirmation could. Yeah, that's a good point. So situations where there's a large number of things that people could say. Yeah. It's a good question. And Deshant will post on the forums. Fabulous, thank you. Yeah, I think this is something that I have also seen a lot of questions on, and the answer will change with 3.0, and hopefully should be easier. And Yasmin has a question about multiple slots. Slots filled by multiple forms. So utter ask slot name won't work for this case. Does not mention that you need form name slot name for the utterance. When the second form is activated, it won't ask the user for that shared slot. I don't think it will if it's already been set, but is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Like if the slot has already been set, it won't be re-asked.
There is a way to unset slots though, right? Or like clear slots. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yep, we have an event called all slots reset, which you can have it returned by a custom action. You can also have a custom action resetting the slot. Like if you're just focused on one slot that you want to be reset to none at some point in the conversation, you can use a regular custom action.
Yeah, I've definitely done that before, particularly for, Alex mentioned database lookups. If you know you're going to want people to run multiple queries, once you run the query, I would reset the slots that were used. Question for Amina about synonyms. While using synonyms, I noticed if I mention the synonym of an entity, it won't be filled. How can I fill the slot with an entity value and its synonym?
So the synonyms are not currently they're not currently stored in the slots. We only have the value attribute. But I am not very familiar with entity synonyms to be able to give a very informed response here.
No. Sorry, I'm trying to. Y'all can watch me try to type. I'm trying to type synonyms. There we go. Concept synonyms. Yeah, Alex, do you have a quick answer for this off the top of your head? So I think what Amina's asking for is, for an example like this, she would like credit card account to be in the slot as well as credit, as like a custom slot, I'm thinking. How can I fill this slot with the entity value and its synonym? Yeah, so both of these pieces of information stored in the slot.
I don't think we handle it, right? I just started thinking that you might be able to use a custom action to do this sort of stuff, but yeah, don't think it can be handled by default somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, we only stored just the value in the slot. So with the slot set event, we set value to a key, which is the slot name. And you can't add any more information.
Maybe we should make a note for the future.
Probably. Yeah, I guess my question, again, from sort of like a design of assistant standpoint, is if it is important that you do different things with like credit card account and credit card and credit account or credit card, like if you want to do different things with those different words that mean almost the same thing, maybe they should be separate slots, right? So I'm trying to think of an example where you don't want different behavior, but you do want to store the synonym, and I'm having a hard time. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It does mean that I can't think of it. So yeah, you might be able to design your assistant in a way where you don't have to do that, given that we don't support it right now without a bunch of custom actions. All right. It sounds like Yasmin's question has been answered. Shuzair, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, was recommending using a validation action. Amina asks, I added action restart at the end of specific rules or stories to reset slots. Do you recommend doing this? Maybe.
Yeah, I would say maybe. I think it depends on the whole context of your use case. All slots reset is more specific. I think when you reset the conversation, when you restart the conversation, there are many other things that are happening. So it's all about, if you just want to reset slots, best to stick with the specific all slots reset event via custom action.
Alexander.
In addition, yeah, I would say that it looks a little bit more logically correct. I would say if you want to reset slots, to do not action restored, but to use an action that is dedicated, that was created exactly for this purpose. But yeah, it might depend on the context as well.
Yeah. So I would, because the thing with restart is you're not just resetting the slots, you're also resetting your dialogue policy to 0. So if when people are done with something, you want to take them right to the top every time and have them repeat the process. So maybe like a booking assistant, possibly. Well, you still probably want to keep some information, right? You probably want to keep like, the person's name or whatever. I'm trying to think of a specific example where it makes sense to completely restart a dialogue from the top every time. Okay. So if you were doing a chatbot that was like an exhibit in a science museum, and you know that there's going to be like 50 kids coming around to like talk to the chatbot, I would liberally restart there because nobody's going to have the context for the conversation because you're going to be switching speakers.
Yeah, it's a very specific example. Yeah.
I don't know. I try to make stuff concrete.
That's a good one. Yeah.
All right. It looks like we have a little bit of a lull in the questions. So, question I'm going to ask Alex first and then Anca. What would be your biggest piece of advice for someone who is either migrating from 2 to 3 or starting with Rasa 3? Just something to keep in mind. It doesn't have to be like the linchpin of everything. Just, a little FYI.
I would say the biggest piece of advice is probably very, very easy one. Like go through the migration guide first to make sure you understand all the changes that were made in the latest release.
Yeah, and let me just quickly show everyone how to get to the migration guide if you want to click through. So in the docs, it is Rasa open source, and then right on this front page, migrate from 2.x. Boop, there's the migration guide. And also our migration guide is cumulative, so if you, for some reason, started with Rasa 0, you could step all the way through to Rasa 3. I hope nobody's in that situation. It seems like it would be a lot of work, but the migration guide, it's pretty thorough. I'd recommend it.
In this case, if you're migrating from 0 point something, it might make more sense to just start from scratch.
Yeah. Anca, what would your one FYI keep in mind piece of advice be?
Yeah, try to think of how powerful this new default action is. So action extract slots. As soon as you've defined a mapping and that mapping applies from the last user message, the slot will be set or updated. So you have to be very deliberate on how the slots will be filled. But if you just want the slots to be filled once, use forms and use them with mapping conditions. So specifying within the mapping another, within the usual mapping keys, which were preserved from 2.0, use a conditions key where you can specify active loop, so the form that will request that slot and the requested slot. So sometimes you may want the requested slot to be the same, or you may want to extract that slot even when requested slot is something different. There could be scenarios. So requested slot is flexible in that way.
Yeah. I think that flexibility is, one of the benefits of being more explicit about how we set things is that you can do things in more different ways. Because you're clearly communicating it, hopefully clearly. All right. Nina, so some clarification on using the restart to reset slots. So when I present a solution to the user and ask whether or not it's what they're looking for, if they say no, they restart the assistant from the top.
I would say it still depends, because in some cases you still want to keep some context. So, I mean, if it works for you, then it's probably fine, right?
Yeah. If it works for your users, it's, the real test of the chatbot. Yeah. I guess what I'd probably, for me, what I would do in this situation is if the first thing doesn't work, I might do some sort of like similarity ranking and show like 3 other options and be like, one of these 3. And then if that's not it, then I would restart the form. Just on the off chance that it's almost what they want, and that way they don't have to redo the form. But if it's not a long form, then I don't think it matters. But if it's like, 18 questions, I don't want to answer 18 questions more than once. I'll just leave. I'm lazy. A good proxy for a user there. All right. Yeah, so we've got a little bit, again, please feel free to ask questions. They don't have to specifically be about slots. You can talk about 3.0 in general. Alex, question for you. What's the difference between slot mappings and slot types? If you are not going to answer that, that's okay. You looked a little surprised when I asked.
No. I mean, well, sorry. I was probably, when the first question about slot mappings was asked, I was actually talking about slot types, I guess. So slot type is basically, it's like type in any type language, I would say. So you basically specify what kind of value the slot can take, and slot mapping specifies how this value can be mapped to this specific slot. So this is probably the simplest explanation I can give. Bianca, you want to elaborate a little bit?
That was perfect. Nothing to add.
And for folks who are coming from a Python background where typing is optional, I guess learn more about typing. I think, do we use PyType? I believe we use typing in our code base. So if you want to see some examples, you can go rummage around in there.
Yeah, but even I think it's still pretty clear what like a string value and a float value is, even if you don't use any types in your code.
Yeah, I have recently been trying to learn JavaScript, and the typing makes me want to leave the language. Yeah, I realize this is why TypeScript exists. Yeah, okay, so we have a question from Yasmin. If we want to stop a user repeating a specific scenario, what do you suggest? Using a slot, Boolean on top of the scenario, maybe?
I'm not sure what scenario is here. Unhappy path? Like, would this be an unhappy path or?
Yeah. So of course I'm just sort of like guessing based on the question. Hello Anand, welcome to the stream. My guess would be like, sometimes you can get into conversations that are super repetitive with a chatbot, right? So it's like, I'm trying to come up with an example of a repetitive conversation. I want to update my billing address. Do you want to pay your bill? No, I want to update my billing address. Do you want to pay your bill? So maybe that sort of thing. Or it could be a story that you don't want to repeat a story from the top, perhaps. So yeah, what would you do in that case?
I think this could be the case of improving training data. So stories and rules, or if you have, like, if you If you find a certain intent gets misclassified, then maybe you need to improve your NLU examples. Yeah, it requires some digging in that area off the top of my head.
I've come up with a better example: onboarding flow that you only want to do once per person. Yeah, Alex, did you have a point to make?
I actually wanted to say more or less the same thing as Anca said. It's probably the situation when you can use only rules or like just improve your training data somehow. But maybe in this particular case, in the case of onboarding, you might consider remembering that user already went through the onboarding flow. Yeah.
Yeah, this would be a good example for using a custom slot mapping. So having another internal slot let's call it completed onboarding. It could be a Boolean slot. And then in the custom extraction code, you can look in the tracker to see if certain slots that should have been filled were all filled, or maybe you wanted certain intents or the latest message should have been of a certain intent. Yeah, but probably a custom slot mapping would be super useful here.
Yeah. I was briefly considering whether checkpointing might be helpful, and I don't think it would be, so don't do that if you were thinking about it, because I was thinking about it.
Yeah, it's probably much easier to do it with a custom action and slot in this case.
Yeah. Very complex conversational flows are the way of madness. Try to avoid it. It'll make you upset in the long run. Amina asks, do you guys have any idea on how to make requests to the Rasa API with Python? And I am assuming that this is...
Well, we do it
This
from
API?
time to time, but actually, yeah, there is an API specification, and doing it with Python is not very different as doing any HTTP API requests with Python. So if you have something specific you wanted to ask about the HTTP API, we're happy to help as well.
Do you have a favorite, I don't know, library for making requests? General question.
Well, honestly, when most of the things we do, we just test the servers. So we use, I don't know, something like curl or HTTP, HTTPy. There is also like a macOS kind of application to send requests to the server. So, but in this case, it's more like just library. I don't know, Sani could probably do this as well.
I'm a fan of requests library.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, like if you want to use an app, you could also use Postman. And I've heard of another one, Insomnia, but I haven't used that one. Postman.
Yeah, those are visual kind of applications that allow you to basically specify everything you want in a very nice like visual form. Yeah.
So some tools to look into there. I also mostly just use curl. I was like, oh, I'm sure there's a Python thing. Yeah. So Yasmin clarifying that the thing that they want to avoid repeating is any scenario with some intents / actions.
Yeah, I guess that's what you were talking about, like onboarding flow, for example. It is a nice example of something you won't want to repeat doing. Yeah, maybe it might make sense. Yeah. Why not?
If it's very short, I would use a rule for it. And then at the end of the rule, set a slot that's like, don't do this one again. But rules don't work for, I think, more than one conversational turn. So, or forms, if you wanted to do it with a form. Christian has a question for both Alex and Anca. If you had a magic wand to wave and see any feature you'd like with slots, what would you create?
I'm trying to channel Ty. Ty is our product manager.
You need to be creative in this case. Imagine, well, you can do anything you want. It's not just like in short or long term. It's like absolutely anything. I don't know, actually. Might be something around some automatic kind of guessing of what you want and how you want to feel. Not sure if it's possible, but
Future slots, they're already set.
yeah, it's like, yeah, slots that are already set and can be set without like any intervention, without any stories, without anything, just some pure magic happening behind the scenes.
Do you have something less fantastical, Anca?
No, dear. Well, it was actually something that was set aside while working on this feature. How to implement short-lived slots. So if we, instead of developers having to reset slots as we've discussed, maybe we could kind of provide an easier way with the parameter in the domain to reset the slots after one user turn. But that did not make it in 3.0 this time.
Yeah, good question. So I guess like slots plus some sort of time component overall seems to be the answer there. Vin wants to know, for slots with a custom mapping, if we have validation through an action, would the form validations be of any use?
Yep, so form validation action should only be used, will only be called by a form within Rasa. Whereas if you want to validate slots outside forms, you should use validation action. You should subclass validation action in the SDK, from the SDK.
Hope that helped, Vin. Amina wants to know about a categorical slot. Is there a specific number of categories, like 3 different values such as low, medium, high, or is there no limit as long as it makes sense in the use case? I think there's like a theoretical limit of how many categories people want to remember. Yeah.
It's probably the limit is about the maximum size of how array could be, how a dictionary could be. I don't know, like that there is no limits that we've created.
Good question. Tipoon says that Rasa also has an internal API you can use to control the bot. Yes. And Christian was clarifying, assuming that you could take Ty's job and control the wand, and then detection that a user wants to fill a slot. I can see that. Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking realistically, I can't think of any way to get that information that doesn't involve some surveillance. I certainly wouldn't be comfortable with, but I can see how you would think about that. This is a fantasy question. I don't think any of us are actually interested in doing that. Adam has a question. How to stop a form and perform the next action with enough slots in the form are filled. Not all the slots have to be filled every time, and have that still be a happy path. So you're going through and filling a form. Once you get like 8 slots filled, then you stop the form and do something else.
Sounds like a case. I would kind of use dynamic form behavior. So for, let's say you just want to, you have a form, you initially thought of requesting 5 slots, but then you thought, well, actually there might be cases where I only want to fill 3 slots. You could just write in the domain those 3 slots, but implement a form validation action to request 2 additional slots, which we call dynamic slots, if the other slots were of a certain value, maybe. If that answers your question. That was the first thought that came to mind.
Oh.
But otherwise, to stop a form, to reject a form, you could, I think you can do that. The user can do that through an unhappy path.
Oh. I feel like there is probably a way to do it with a rule, but it would be convoluted. I think the dynamic form would probably be easier.
I think with rules, it might become too complicated.
Because it's not specific slots, right?
Possible. Yeah.
Sorry, I talked over you. Yeah. Question from Christian. If we want to implement Anca's slot fill fading feature, SF3, can we have a custom action that detects when a slot is filled and unset at the appropriate time? So, like a clock, I guess. Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts for implementation of that, either Anca or Alex?
I love that it already has a name, SF3. But yeah, go on, Anca, I think.
Was this about the short-lived slots?
Yep.
Yeah.
How would I implement this? Through a custom action that detects if the slot was filled, and then like this custom extraction method. I would have to try it to see if it actually works. If the slot exists, like if the slot was set in the tracker, then you reset it immediately. Otherwise, don't do anything.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that would work.
Yeah, it was my first idea as well, but I think like it's very hard to do this sort of engineering decisions on the go. So we might take a look at the code first to understand how it's better to be done.
And just that wasn't your question. Sorry, I was reading the question. I was like, at first, my thought was that you were thinking about, Christian, we're thinking about a timer, and when the timer goes off, the slot gets unfilled. And I was like, it makes more sense for it to get unfilled at like a specific condition in the conversation. And I think that is what you actually meant by appropriate time, and not like a countdown. That could be fun for like a game, though. You have to like, or if you wanted to do like a Among Us sort of thing as a chatbot. There's a countdown, and then it's revealed at the end who the werewolf imposter is. Sorry, it's very similar to a game called Werewolf. Anyway, Amina wants to know, when I'm working on a chatbot with a lot of different scenarios, it helps to divide the rules and stories. Why is it not the same with the domain file so that you have multiple domain files? Question.
I think you can, well, I think I'm misinterpreting the question. You can have a domain directory where you've split the section of the domain in different files, but I don't think we have multiple domains. Like in a way, the domain is the brain or of the bot. If you try to have different domains as in different kind of, let's say, bot personalities, that is not possible.
Yeah.
You can specify a domain when doing like training, for example, but I'm not sure if that's what would be appropriate in this situation. But yeah, you can use a domain directory if you want to split it a little bit between different files.
Yeah. So if you're asking about the data organization, yes, you can have multiple files. If you're asking about sort of different types of behavior, then you're sort of into multi-tenancy and multi-bot stuff, which is a little bit more complex. Not Anca. Aquila has a good talk about that on our YouTube channel that I think is called something like multi-tenant something. I can actually, Emily, if you could find the URL for that and post it, that would be great in the chat. I was gonna say I can tweet it. I was like, that's not the most efficient way to do this. Amina wants to know, ooh, okay, I think this is a little bit of a theoretical question. Do you have an idea on how many sessions a chatbot can handle at the same time?
It depends on how you deploy your chatbot, how complicated the logic is. So it's very hard to give a very specific answer to this question. Yeah.
I know some of our enterprise customers have a lot of concurrent conversations going on. So the theoretical limit is quite high. The engineering needed to support that theoretical limit is also quite high. There's a lot of stuff to think about. Amina wants to know, what do you use to test a chatbot? Do you have a specific tools or do you build your own program?
We have a dedicated section in the documentation that is about testing. So we have a lot of like options of how to write tests for your chatbots.
Basically. Test. Let's do this in the right tab. There we go. All right, testing your assistant. So yeah, we have some built-in functionality there. So Emily, the video was Aquila's talk on multi-tenancy. And I do not remember what the title is. Hopefully that's enough for you to get it. Yeah. So Anca or Alex, do you want to talk a little bit about how testing works?
Oh, all right. So you can write test stories. And basically, you can check your bot against these test stories. This is the simplest you can do. And writing test stories is actually pretty easy. It's just describing the behavior that you expect. Yeah. And once you use the Rasa test command, you will understand how the expecting behavior matches the reality. Yeah.
One thing I would add is that currently any custom, like if you expect a custom action to set a slot, it's currently not possible in Rasa test.
So you need
to. Sorry.
Oh,
yeah, there are certain limitations for testing, but the whole test suite is going to be improved in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I would test your action code separately using whatever unit integration tests you've been using, and then for Rasa specifically using Rasa test, and then more broadly for evaluation, making sure that you are getting it in front of people. That's the Rasa answer. Give it to people and see what they do, and then improve it for them. Yeah. And I think I actually did a live stream a while ago where I go through writing tests and that functionality a couple weeks ago, and we also wrote tests at the end of the live stream I did not last Friday but the Friday before. So if you want to go back and find that. Yeah. Hui, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, says, I have a story that lets a user update their info slots. Also, this is going to be the last question. User can cancel or update at any time, so I can't set all the slots to none. Is there a solution to this problem besides duplicating all the slots? Okay, so they're going through and they're resetting slots one by one, so you can't, and they might stop partway through the process where only some of the slots have been reset. So how would you handle this?
Custom actions. Maybe.
Because you can't do a form for that because you can't update slots in a form. Right?
No.
Yeah, I think custom actions are probably going to be easiest. Outside of a form, you can update slots, though, using the appropriate mapping. So,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, custom action is like an ultimate solution for every kind of problem.
And one last question from Elif. How can I get a data set from a CSV file instead of a database in Rasa? So if you're sort of integrating it with a custom action, you should use pandas, I guess, in a custom action to interact with your CSV file. I don't think I do. So I was going to say I think I have a very old YouTube video about it. I don't think I ever did a video. But yes, I hear that this is a question that a lot of people have, and it's on my mind. All right. Thanks so much for joining today, Alex and Anca. That is time. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I hope this was helpful. We will be back tomorrow. So Vincent and ACL are going to be talking about markers. So if you have more questions about sort of what success looks like and how to measure it, great office hours for that. On Thursday, I'm going to be doing live coding. We'll just be creating a new 3.0 assistant from scratch. And then on Friday, Emma is going to be doing a community hour and talking about our fabulous community and everything y'all do. And thanks so much, Emily, for sharing that talk by Aquila. I can double check really quick and make sure this is the right one. That's the one. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you, Anca. Thank you, Alex, for making time. And we will see you on the forums if you've got questions or in our other videos. Bye.
Thank you.